Good morning, everyone. We are very happy to host you this morning for one of our webinars. You know, we have quite of a series also on our success stories, and we thought important to look at what the STEP strategic technology for Europe platform has done. We had the pleasure to have Davide already with us quite some time, who's heading the work on the STEP task force in DG Budge. So it's to have an update. They had also many new publications. So we thought, hey, interesting to share with you the advancements of the work. So very glad you could be with us, and very glad to host Davide. So I think without due delay, Davide, I'll let you the floor, and we do your presentation, and then we have a Q&A session. If you have questions, also you can put some of the questions on the chat. I will pick them up also in the discussion part. So. Davide, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being with us again.
Yes, thank you, Muriel. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. Yes?
Yes, perfect.
As Muriel mentioned, my name is Davide Lombardo. I am the deputy head of the STEP task force in DG Budget, and it's a pleasure. It's an honor to be invited. Thank you again. I thought I will speak for about 20-25 minutes to update you on the STEP initiative per se and what have been the first results for the first 1.5 years of operation. And I will also give you a gist of, like a teaser of the interim evaluation report that we have published in June, which was part of the MFF, of the preparatory work that went into the Commission's MFF proposal for the next multi-annual financial cycle, which you know was presented in mid-July. So without further ado, what is STEP? STEP was a proposal from the European Commission in 2023, already a bit of a response to the challenges that the EU industry and the economy are facing. As a result of, there are pressures on the competitiveness of the EU and on the resilience, especially in the new global context in which the trade patterns have been shaken, and also the trade system itself is not longer working as it used to a few years back on predictable rules. So there was a notion that the EU has to step up the development and the production of critical technologies which are needed for the twin transition, because it can no longer reliably count on these technologies being supplied on the world market. So we have, as you have seen also from the Draghi report, which is 1 year old this week, there is huge investment needs. Of course, the EU budget is small and limited, and there is a big need to mobilize private capital. We know that in the EU, the capital markets are not at the same level of debt that are in other jurisdictions. But so the STEP was a bit of an attempt from the Commission to address all these challenges. It was very much, in a sense, in line with the diagnosis of both the Draghi report, as I mentioned, and of the Letta report on the importance of strengthening the single market. We also had a lot of feedback from the industry and from the beneficiaries like yourselves, where the offer of EU funding is seen as fragmented and complex, and there is dispersed activity of advisory that we offer and support services, and the information even needed to access all these, both the funding and the services, is difficult to come by, difficult to understand, and costly to use. So we had also, importantly, the feedback that whereas the EU does quite well in supporting the basic research and the production of ideas, there is a big gap in terms of supporting startups and mid-scales when they try to scale up, indeed. So that the most painful phenomenon to see from a policy maker's perspective is when we see startups that have to go to other jurisdictions to access funding needed to scale up their production and turning their ideas into successful products. So all of this means that there was a big demand, in a sense, for the services of STEP, and therefore, so the Commission came up with this proposal. In a nutshell, STEP is a regulation. As a regulation, was adopted by the co-legislators and is operational since the 1st of March of 2024. So, as I said, it's about 1.5 years. The most important thing about STEP is that it's not a new fund. It's an approach that the Commission has been putting forward, operating by pooling funding from 11 existing EU programs towards the support of these critical technologies. There was an additional top-up of 1.5 billion for the defense fund, but in a sense, in the great scheme of things, I think it's important to understand that STEP is operating through the existing programs of the European Commission. As you know, the budget is in place for 7 years, so STEP comes in the middle of the 7-year cycle and uses existing programs. So our job as a task force in DG Budget is to persuade and convince the management, the managers of the different EU funds to prioritize these technologies, which are essential for the EU to be able to achieve its overarching priorities. So we try to be efficient as an operation. We try to use existing networks and processes. And we try to improve the articulation between the funds that the EU and the Commission manage directly with the funds that, in fact, are the lion's share of the EU budget, which are the funds that are managed by the member states and the regional authorities. So what's called in technical jargon, the shared management funds, which are about 70% of the EU budget. We have we have some tools which I will go into a bit of detail later, with in particular the STEP seals, which is awarded by 2 high-quality projects that pursue these STEP objectives across the EU. We have been working with implementing partners like the EIB, the EIF, and the national promotional banks. We see ourselves as a STEP task force, as a service-oriented team trying to support beneficiaries and project promoters in the 3 sectors. We have developed a portal which tries to overcome the dispersion of information that I mentioned earlier. And we see ourselves also as a pilot for the Competitiveness Fund, which has been announced in July, and which should be the workhorse of the funding for competitiveness in the next multi-annual cycle. So in terms of scope, as I mentioned, STEP for the moment caters to 3 sectors. So it's digital and deep tech innovation, it's clean and resource-efficient technologies, and biotechnologies. But when the objective is to develop and manufacture these critical technologies in the EU. So it's a way to both underpin our competitiveness equation, but also to buttress the strategic autonomy of the EU and to reduce the dependency that we have or might develop vis-a-vis third countries. There is also as an objective the aim of developing and addressing developing the necessary human capital for these technologies and to address the gaps that are currently hindering this development. And in terms of condition, it's important to note that by the regulation, not every, for example, digital technology is deserving of STEP financial support, but only those technologies that are critical, whereby in the regulation, critical is defined as either bringing an innovative edge to the EU as a whole, or as I mentioned earlier, to contribute to addressing or reducing the dependencies of the EU as a whole. So on this slide, I have some examples. For example, as regards digital and deep tech, we could think of artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and advanced tech connectivity. As for the clean and resource efficient tech or clean tech, we can think of carbon capture and storage technologies or the heat pumps. And as regards biotech, we can think of molecular biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, crop biotechnology. I should say that this is the original format or the original scope of STEP, for which we actually produced a guidance note in May of 2024. But there is now discussions and there are proposals to expand the scope of STEP to also include the defense sector pretty much. And there is an omnibus that is a defense omnibus that is currently under discussion in the Parliament and Council, which should be adopted by the end of this year. So by the end of this year, we expect that the STEP sectors will be, in fact, 4, and we will be publishing an additional guidance note to both explain some of the issues that have proved more difficult to crack and to explain what in the defense sector is covered. And this is what I was saying. So there is a 4th sector. Although we already have the European Defence Fund, which is one of the 5 programs that we manage directly, and it was even supplemented with 1.5 billion, as I mentioned. We have a proposal, as I mentioned, which basically I went over this slide already. So there is the expectation is that this proposal will be adopted by the end of 2025. A few words on the tools. I mentioned the last one on the left bottom, which on the left on the bottom right, which is the one-stop shop, the STEP task force. So I mentioned also that we, as a main tool, we are pooling funds from existing EU programs. So we try to increase the share of EU programs that cater to these important technologies. And so therefore we have a network within the Commission of 14 directorates generals that we meet regularly to try and achieve this aim. I mentioned there is a STEP seal, which is modeled along the lines of the Seal of Excellence, which some of you might be familiar. It's a label that the Commission grants to high quality projects that qualify under STEP calls, under the programs in the remit of STEP, and it's meant to enhance the visibility of these projects, including not only with other forms of public funding, in particular the EU funds managed by the national authorities, but also with private sector investors. And the portal, the STEP portal, which I invite all of you to visit, is a new website where we are piloting basically the integration of all information about relevant funding opportunities, regardless of where in the EU budget they are funded. So, so this means that we are trying to showcase the funding opportunities not only of the funds that we manage directly in the Commission, which is only 30% of the budget, but also of the funds that the national authorities make available for these projects. And we are working on the STEP portal also to make this information not only available, but also easily digestible, especially for smaller beneficiaries that might not be able to afford the sometimes high consulting fees that are routinely spent to navigate in the complex funding landscape that is currently the EU budget. So we are also planning to add, for example, AI-based capabilities to this portal, where basically there will be a chatbot, a bit like ChatGPT, that will help project promoters identify the funding opportunities and also possibly help them to apply. So this is, I think, an interesting development, and we are currently working on this. We plan to launch like a pilot version of this chatbot already by the end of this year, if we manage. So as I mentioned, in STEP, there are 11 programs which we are using. 5 of them are directly managed by the Commission. So this is Horizon Europe. I'm sure you are familiar with it very well. There is the Innovation Fund, the Digital Europe Program, the EU for Health, and the European Defence Fund. And then there are 6 programs which are still funded by the EU budget, but they are not managed by the Commission. This has to do with the European Regional Development Fund, the European Social Fund Plus, the Cohesion Fund, and the Just Transition Fund, which collectively we call structural funds or cohesion funds. Then there is the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is the crisis instrument that was put forward in 2020 and is running through 2026 next year. And then there is the InvestEU, which is basically financial instruments, guarantees, loans managed by the EIB and other national promotional banks. And the idea of the STEP seal is precisely to link these 2 different universes of EU funds, and in a sense to leverage the selection which we conduct at the EU level, which is very rigorous and identifies as the most excellent projects at the EU level, and tries to enhance their visibility so that they can get either alternative or cumulative funding from the other programs. So this is what has been done until now in terms of mobilization of the EU funding. So as of September 2025, so now we have basically, in the yellow part, we have the programs that we directly manage. We have issued 88 STEP calls, which come with about 10.5 billion of funding. On the right side, you can see the examples about the topics for these calls. So it goes from quantum gravimetry, space gravimetry, to clean tech manufacturing. And we have received a very strong response by the member states. So in the blue part of this summary, you can see that among the cohesion funds in particular, we have had 78 requests to amend the cohesion programs to cater to STEP projects. So, and they have all been already adopted. We have an additional 15 or so that we are assessing. But these that have been adopted account for 11.5 billion of additional resources for STEP projects, and these are from 17 member states. So there is quite a bit of funding that we have managed to redirect towards these critical technologies. And on the STEP portal, you can also see, as they are published, the actual calls that then these managing authorities in the regions are funding with these redirected resources to support STEP projects. And this is a quick map that you can peruse at your convenience, that shows exactly how much money has been made available in the different member states under cohesion policy for STEP. And we update this map on a regular basis and timely fashion on the STEP portal. This is a bit how the STEP seal works. In the interest of time, I will skip it, but I mentioned already that it's basically a way to enhance the high-quality projects that we identify, we manage to find. We may or may not be able to fund them all, but we stamp them with this seal, and then we proactively advertise them to member states. And the member states have benefits in supporting these seals in recognition of their EU value added. For example, just to give you one example, in the cohesion program, in some cohesion programs like the RDF, they can support these programs, these projects directly without having to issue an additional call and without having to make additional evaluations. So we are quite optimistic. We are quite keen on seeing the STEP seals receive additional and required funding. So this is an overview of the STEP seals that we have awarded until now. 400 projects have received the STEP seals until now. They are distributed across pretty much all member states. So they are either already funded at the EU level, like 240 of them, but there is also 160 of them that have received no funding. And for all of them, as I mentioned, we are trying to leave no stone unturned in terms of securing the additional or alternative funding. And now an important part of our work is developing in these months, which is to also get these projects better known with private investors. Not only public investors, but also private investors. This is the portal that I mentioned. With this QR code, you can be brought directly there. It's basically a portal that includes all the calls, as you can see in this representative slide. We are expanding the capabilities to make it easier to use. So you will be able to say, okay, right now you can say I am in the clean tech sector. Can you tell me which calls are currently open or which calls are about to open? And this tool will tell you. In the future, our idea is to expand the capabilities so that the promoter can just come and say, I produce wind turbines in this member state. Is there any opportunities for me from the EU budget? I see, Muriel, there is some questions popping up, but I'm disregarding. I leave them to you for later for summarizing. Thanks. So we also have an interesting dashboard of all the projects that we are showcasing. We are showcasing these STEP seals. We are also, for some of them, our commissioners go and visit. They try to bring even more publicity to them. And so we are also now showcasing the projects that are ultimately funded by the member states and the regional authorities on this portal. So we are trying to provide all the information easily. And we finally on the portal offer the updated list of national contact points, which are the first point of contact if you want to try to raise funds for your project in the different member states. So, if you contact the national contact points, they will be able to explain what may be available. They may be able to point you to public and/or private sources of funding. I also wanted to quickly go over the reporting that we have done, in particular because we have, as I mentioned at the beginning, published the interim evaluation in June because it was an input into the next MFF proposal, since after all, STEP is meant to be a pilot for the competitiveness fund. And so I invite you to go and look at this report. It's not very long. If I can summarize, we have both some achievements to flag, but also we have described some implementation hurdles that we have found, which we are hoping to address both with the proposal that we put out and with the other work that we are already starting in terms of the implementation, ultimately, of the proposal once it will be adopted, hopefully by the end of next year. So in terms of achievement, we have integrated quite well STEP into the implementation of the 5 directly managed programs. I said that the member states have reacted very, very positively to the incentives that we have introduced in the STEP regulation to redirect money towards, I want to say, higher EU priorities. So priorities that are important for the member state, but also for the EU. And I think we are doing quite well on the STEP portal. We are getting very good feedback that project promoters find it a useful tool to overcome the fragmentation that is currently, unfortunately, hindering access of the EU funds to a lot of promising projects. In terms of implementation hurdles, what we flag is that we have not been able, on the other hand, to elicit interest from the RRF managing authorities. So even though there were some provisions in the regulation to encourage the support of step seals, for example, as of today, non-step seals have been picked up by the RRF, whereas on the cohesion funds, we have calls which are only open to step seals, so quite the contrary on the cohesion front. We have still a slow uptake of step seals. In particular, I would say for those seals which are granted to multi-beneficiary projects, because there is a quite natural coordination problem between the different managing authorities. And we also have still some hurdles in the fact that we are using the funds such as they are. And that means that, for example, in terms of combining funding, there are issues. There is also a lot of feedback that we received of the strictures, as people see them, that come from the state aid framework, where the step seals are only given a bit of additional aid content by the regional aid guidelines modification, but there is no special treatment for step seals. So what we have learned from this is that the high number of funding programs in current situation is an issue, and because they have different rules and different processes, and that's why we are trying to, in a sense, streamline and consolidate in the competitiveness fund the offer of EU funding for competitiveness in the next multi-year financial framework. There is appetite for seamless combination of funding across programs, and we are working on getting that simplified in the next MFF. And there is a very big appetite for a single online gateway. So in terms of information about the EU funding opportunities, our ambition, as we put it out in the proposal for the next MFF, is to expand what we are doing with the STEP portal, which currently is only for, in a sense, for STEP-related calls, to all the calls that the EU budget will publish in the next cycle. So we are going to work on this single gateway that will act as really a single one-stop shop, overcoming the proliferation of one-stop shops that we have today, where by some counts we have 14 or 15 of them, which is certainly a source of confusion. So I'm sorry I had to go a bit fast over this presentation, but it's going to be made available to you by Muriel and her team. So I'll stop here. Thank you for your attention, and I will open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Davide. All clear. We have a lot of questions already in the chat, so let's start with these ones. And if people want to raise their hand to add more, please feel free, then I will pick you up one to one. There was a couple of questions, maybe we do those before, on the step seal. So one of the first question was, when do the project receive the seal? And how does that function a little bit to compare to the Marie Curie? And also the
Yes.
question for the multi-beneficiary project, like the Pillar 2 of Horizon Europe. I guess that's where people are more interested to see.
So the step seal is automatically granted when projects meet the basically the eligibility and award criteria of a step call. So the first condition is that a project promoter needs to apply to a step call, not to any call, but to calls which are labeled as step. And the calls that are labeled as step reflect the discussions that we have with the different DGs in the Commission to ensure that these calls are in fact catering to these technologies that I described earlier, that produce in the sectors that we have been covering, either have the potential to create an innovative boost for the EU competitiveness, or they reduce the dependencies. So if you apply to a step call and you are meeting all the requirements, including, importantly, the award criteria, which means if you make it to the reserve list, so to speak, then you automatically get a step seal, whether or not you receive funding under this step call. So you will receive a PDF file in your space on the funding and tender portal that basically is a step seal. Then you will be asked whether you consent to this step seal award to be advertised on the STEP portal. And if you say yes, then that's when the STEP task force comes into play. We publish it on the STEP portal and we push it very aggressively to both public authorities and, since the last few months, private investors. So, so that's how it works. So that means that even a multi-beneficiary consortium in Pillar 2 project can get a seal. In that case, every member of the consortium gets the seal. We typically communicate through the main sponsor, or through the main to the organizer of the consortium, but every member of the consortium gets a seal. Now, as I mentioned, for multi-beneficiary step seals, there are issues which are specific, in particular when it comes to trying to elicit funding from the regional authorities, because then, of course, there is a bit of a free rider issue, right? I mean, basically, some regional authorities might hope that the others will fund it. And there are also issues to the extent to which these projects can be funded, because the regional authorities needs to ascertain that the funding its own member of the consortium will still advance the goals of the regional program. But there is in principle no difference between a mono-beneficiary and a multi-beneficiary project that applies to a step call, and if it qualifies, it will get a step seal.
Okay, that's I hope, Jan and Astrid, does that answer your question? If not, just raise your hand. Then that brings a question from Marco, and then I will go from the other questions. What is the feedback you're getting from private investor when you're pushing the step seal to them?
That's a very good question. Thank you. I would say that we're getting a very good feedback, in the sense that they actually do seem to value quite a bit this trial process that the projects have to go through to basically be screened and selected by the EU programs. I mean, private investors are quite aware that the EU programs are vastly oversubscribed, and so they actually do take notice of projects that we basically select or screen for them. Of course, I think it's still in the early days, and we are trying very hard to raise the profile of the STEP seals. I also should say that we do recognize that the STEP portal was initially really designed for the project promoters and not as much with investors in mind, but we are trying to change that. So we are not aware of immediate cases of funds having been provided, but we are working on that, and we see fertile ground. We are now also exploring ways to, for example, leverage such platforms as DealScope, for example, DealFlow, that it's the mostly used platform by venture capitalists to basically create a space there for STEP seals, so that, again, we raise the visibility. But of course, there is an issue that some of the project promoters do not actually want private funding. They don't want to open up their capital structure, for example, to private investors. They applied for grants, but many others are, especially those that don't receive grants, they are open, and we talk to them, and we try to see increasingly in as personalized an approach as we can, because at the end of the day, so far the numbers are still manageable, but they are growing very fast. We try to see what we can do for them, and we try to put them in touch with relevant investors. Then in the end, whether they convince the investors or not is really a bit off our hands, but we try to do the best that we can to bring them as close as possible together.
Yes. Thank you, Davide. Maybe a question on the basics as well. Françoise was asking a little bit the differentiation between the funding and tender, the participant portals that we know well for the RDI grants, and the one of the STEP portal, especially looking at the ECF regulation, which announced one gigantic financial toolbox, and so maybe your STEP portal becomes the future ECF portal.
That's a very good question indeed. So the funding and tender portal does a comprehensive job to publish, of course, the funding opportunities that the EU Commission, the European Commission, basically puts out to the funds that we manage directly. But remember, this is only 30% of our budget. But the funding and tender portal at the moment has nothing to say about the funds that, or the calls for proposal that, for example, Italy might put out using European funds. And the STEP portal tries to bridge this gap, which is a very important gap because that's 70% of our budget. But it does so at the moment only for the STEP relevant funding opportunities. So for the opportunity, for the call for proposals, which we all agree cater to STEP projects. The goal, as I mentioned, for the next MFF is to integrate these 30% and 70% in a single 100% place that covers the whole EU budget. And it's not, it sounds like a low-hanging fruit, but it's not straightforward. So we are actually, as we speak, we are starting the discussions in the House to see what is needed to do that. We need some legal hooks. We need a lot of technological IT developments. But we also are quite aware, increasingly aware, including because of the experience of STEP, that the technology is going so well and so fast that we cannot afford not to do this. So we all are keen to produce this, what you call it, gigantic portal. I would call it a single portal that basically allows us to showcase the whole EU budget and not only 30% of it.
Which means probably you have language barrier and stuff like that on all the other stuff.
Yeah, but now, you know, Mulia, as you know, with the new AI capabilities, it's technologically very easy to bridge these barriers of the language, for example. So we want to make it in a way that whoever comes to the portal, you know, will be able to use it and will be able to get information in their own language from all the other calls that currently are published in about 400 different websites in the different member states in the different languages. So we want to simplify. I mean, simplification is a big ambition of this commission in general and for the budget in particular.
And do you mean that you want not only a portal, but sometimes streamline also when the funding comes in?
Oh yes,
comes
that's
out,
indeed another strong ambition that we have. We see that the time for grant is still too long. So we are trying to, you don't see much of this directly in the proposals, because the proposals, well, they do the framework, right? They simplify the number of programs. They introduce this single rule book in a enhanced manner compared to now. But where the work that you don't see behind the scenes, which is starting, is one where we will be, from an administrative perspective, trying to simplify all the processes that ultimately are involved between the definition of the work program, the design of the call, the publication of the call, and then the management of the call, the evaluation, the feedback, the results of the call, and then even the grant agreement process that still takes time. So we are also launching benchmark studies to see how the other jurisdictions manage to do things better, which jurisdictions manage to do things better, and how do they do that, while taking into account, of course, that each jurisdiction has their own institutional setup, so that some of the fast tracks that may be available to others are not quite available at the EU level. They might be available at national levels, but not at the EU level. But it's certainly a big goal that we have, and for which we're always looking for feedback, as you know. And I thank you already, because you have already provided a lot, but we're always open for feedback. There is on the STEP portal, there is a page where you can send feedback. It comes straight into the email of the STEP task force.
Okay, noted. So if members have some feedbacks to give, then we will use that. Maybe a question to you from Mirka, because of the steps still trying to combine, and you presented it as the pilot for the Compet Fund. How do you see the proposals at the moment of the Compet Funds and the Horizon Europe? Because actually the work programming should be much more integrated. Do you think that there will be some learning of the work you've done in the STEP and with the STEP seal?
I think it's the important lesson from the STEP is that it's important to be strategic. It's important to steer the funds in the same direction. We thought that now this may or may not have happened in the current setup, but we hope that with the next setup, where we have streamlined competitiveness fund and closely integrated with the framework program, this will be more possible. For example, there will be one work program per window in the competitiveness fund, and importantly, the directions, if you wish, for applied research will be much more jointly determined. So we hope that there will be more unity of ambition, more like directionality between the two programs. But of course, a lot of it depends on the details, and the specific governance of the two instruments is still being worked out. But I think the framework, if you look at the proposals, is conducive to more coherent funding, whereby there is a continuity across the entire investment stages or development stages of a project, so that there is ideas that are supported, but also they are then turned into practical, useful technologies, especially where we most need them, through the interaction between the Horizon, the framework program, and the ECF.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Mirka. I'm sure we would love to know more details on how this will.
Yeah, and we also have to keep in mind, Muriel and Mirka, that we're talking about the proposal of the Commission. I mean, now there are very intense discussions, both in the Council In the Parliament, they have not yet started in earnest, but they will soon. And so we need to see what is the final architecture. But what I guess I'm talking is about the underlying goals of the proposal, such as the Commission put it out.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Davide. I think we have one question I didn't pick up from the list of the question was the link with cohesion funds. And to say, okay, then you are linking with let's say some of the national funds. So would that have influence on the geography of of innovation? So we always call the innovation gap in Europe. So would that help fitting this, or would that increase that? So did you see more member states being interested, especially with those who have cohesion funds, or not especially?
Well, I mean, the cohesion fund will. We are talking about the next MFF, right?
Yeah, and I think maybe
Yeah.
what you have learned so far with the seals. So
oh no, with the
a
seal,
lot of people with the cohesion funds.
Right now, there is indeed an issue which is perhaps unavoidable, is that the distribution of the cohesion funds is and the distribution of the seals are not aligned, right? We have the seals mostly still go to countries that have relatively less cohesion funds and vice versa. So in a sense, trying to get the seals funded by cohesion funds is difficult because of this initial mismatch in the starting points. But we are seeing, as I mentioned, interest in all regions and in all member states, pretty much. I mean, I think it's now we have program amendment from 17 member states to try and support these seals, the STEP seals, and STEP in general, because the realization is that these technologies are really quite important for the competitiveness, not only of the EU, of course, but also of the individual member states. So member states have all, I mean, with some financial incentives, but admittedly, but they have all come to the recognition of the importance of these sectors and of these technologies. So from different starting points, but everybody's trying to do their bit. And I think from the next MFF, the idea would be to maintain the ECF as an excellence-based instrument. The widening tools in Horizon will still be there, but there will be also an effort to encourage the reforms in the member states that are needed to close this gap faster than it would otherwise close naturally.
Okay, thanks. And maybe just a very quick last question and comment, because I know then we have to close. From Servet, from industry, from CEPIC, we have a comment on the could the step help to have predictability of investments that's been along the journey? So it's not only the instruments, but that we know that there is funds coming from the different, let's say, TRL parts. And at the moment, sometimes we think even in Horizon Europe, we are fighting for having the whole scale being picked up. Also, the lower TRL level had a lot of comments. And then having to move to financial instrument for the higher TRL. So do you think the step and maybe what comes in the step will help that?
I think,
of investment?
I think STEP has picked up on these gaps that I mentioned at the beginning in the funding development of a project. So there is a strong effort to close this gap especially in the next MFF. But there will always be the need to keep in mind that the budget of the EU remains limited. So there will always be a need to try to leverage this small funding to get the biggest bang possible, which usually is by combining it with private funding, right? So I think it's going to be unavoidable that the more the project is in effect bankable or amenable to private funding, then the role of the EU budget should be scaled down. That's quite essential. But I think we will want to also with the Scale Up Fund, which is being launched now, we want to make sure that we do not have any ex ante gap, so that we forget to cater to some stages, right? So that I think is going to be closed much better than is today. Unfortunately, the constraint remains that the EU budget is small. I mean, we should not lose the overall picture. I mean, it's only 1% of the EU GDP, and the competitiveness funding is only one part of the tasks of the EU budget. So it cannot fix everything, but it can certainly be smarter and more effective in mobilizing other forms of funding. And
super.
I'm afraid I do have to go.
I think you have to go, so I think we have to close. And there were some more questions, but then I think we can use also the the feedback email of the STEP platform. But we know where to find you, Davide. If really key questions.
Exactly.
I think people are thanking you as well.
I do encourage all of you to please visit the STEP portal, learn from it if anything, but also give us the feedback and the questions, because this is our role. We are quite a pilot setup, but we find it really useful to get the concrete feedback from actual people that try to access the budget and sometimes don't succeed. Yeah. Thank you again very much.
Thank you so much, Davide, and thanks to everybody also for joining us today. Much appreciated. So we keep tuned.
Cheers.